Well, welcome everybody to Mitcham Hills Church this morning. We're in for a great day. We're starting a new series called Grow, and Cullen's going to be leading us and speaking to us about growing in our character. So I hope you have a great time today.
I want to start with a question. Have you ever found yourself in a place in your life where you thought you were ready for something, but you weren't? You thought you were ready for something, but you weren't. You thought you'd done all the things necessary to prepare yourself for a big moment in your life. But then when it came to the crunch of the moment, you weren't actually ready. In a former life, I played cricket, and one winter I was preparing for a 2020 tournament that was in about August, and I spent the whole winter preparing for this tournament. I was going to be playing my first lot of 2020 games over in South Africa, and I prepared brilliantly. I did all the physical training. I prepared myself mentally. I knew the opposition so well. Everything was done precisely up to the point of the game. And I got picked in the first game, and I went out there and I performed terribly. I had a terrible performance. My dad was very disappointed in me. No, that's not. I performed poorly. Yeah, you know those fathers. No. And I sat in the change rooms after this game, after bowling very, very poorly and performing poorly, and thought, what did I do wrong? I thought back over my preparation. I thought back of all the things I'd done. Did I have the right breakfast in the morning? I had wheat bix. Should I have had cornflakes? Was that the thing that went wrong? And a coach said to me after the game, when I was talking to him about it, he said, you can analyse it all. You can think about whether you should have done more. You were absolutely ready. Your issue, Cullen, was there was something deep inside you that wasn't ready. Something deep inside you wasn't ready. You didn't believe enough. Now, for many of us in our lives, when it comes to the biggest moments of our life, the moments when we're stepping out into a new space to achieve something, or a moment in our life when we're confronted with significant adversity or external factors that place significant pressures on us, the thing that is the most important at that moment is our character, is the thing deep inside us. It's often not whether we're technically good enough at something. It's not often whether we've got the right intellectual knowledge on a particular matter. It's whether our character has grown enough to the point when we can take on whatever that particular thing is, or we can face down that adversity and deal with it with maturity and self-control. Our character is the starting point. Whether you call it character, or some people call it the soul, or the conscience, or the inner self, that part deep within us is the most important thing. So the question that we face in those big moments of life, how has our character grown? Now, you might have an experience of this where there was a particular period of your life where you surprised yourself, where you found like an inner strength deep within you that you didn't know you had. It's not tangible, it's not something you can feel and hold, but it's something deep within you. Your character had grown. You might have an example in your life where you look at a certain situation and you acted in a certain way and you say to yourself, 10 years ago, I never would have acted like that. 10 years ago, I never would have had the maturity to make the decisions that I made at that time, to execute the kind of wisdom or maturity that I did there. I have grown. My character has grown. Now, over the next 4 weeks, we're going to look at growth. We're talking about this series called Grow. And here at Mitcham Hills Church, we believe inherently that as individuals and as a church, that we have a God who believes in us growing our character. That of all the areas of growth you can have professional growth, you can have wealth growth, you can have all the different types of growth, physical growth, you can get fitter or you can get stronger or whatever. The most important area of growth is what happens deep within you and deep within me. Why? 2 things really quickly. 1, whether you're a person of faith or a person who's still exploring faith, you know that the greatest wisdom in your life comes from that place. The times when you do well in life, it always starts with good character. And the second thing we know is that God seems to have a specific focus on character in the Bible. He seems to care more about what's going on in your heart and in my heart than he does about all the sort of outputs that come from our lives. He seems to be focused on that. So we're going to have a real focus of this in the next few weeks. And to start the series, this morning I want to look at a guy in the scriptures who had a major failure of character, but who then God used and grew his character over a number of years to become a great leader. Now, the story we're going to look at today is a pretty well-known story if you're a person who's been around church for a long time, or even if you haven't been around church, you know the story. It's the story of Moses. And when you think of Moses, you think of the Red Sea, like the guys are looking at today. You think about scabs on Ben's face, or you think about the Ten Commandments, and you think about all these things. But within the story of Moses, there's a story of personal growth, of character growth. So I want to look at that today. And we're going to follow some of the readings today. Now, just a really quick bit of context on how we're going to do these readings today. The story of Moses is kind of found in two parts of the Bible. It's in Exodus, in the Old Testament, right at the start, where it tells the story in great detail. But it's also a guy called Stephen in the New Testament, in the book of Acts, tells the story of Moses, and he probably does it a bit more succinctly. So I'm going to kind of move between those two readings today as we unpack and ask the question, what did personal character growth look like for Moses, and what might it mean for us? So if we go to the next slide, thanks, 80. Little quick bit of context here. Moses, the Pharaoh at the time, the king, wanted to kill all the kids, kill all the boys. So Moses' parents stuck him in a little cane basket and sent him down the River Nile. And he was picked up by the Pharaoh's daughter, and Pharaoh's daughter raised him. So that's where we find it. So he was raised in the king's palace, essentially. So Pharaoh's daughter took him and brought him up as her own son. Moses was educated in all the wisdom of the Egyptians and was powerful in speech and action. So what have we got here with Moses? We've got a person who has grown physically. He's now 40 years old, as we find out in the next text. Mary, can I just have a glass of water? Is that okay? I'm drying out. We've got a guy, so Moses has grown physically. He's grown intellectually. He's been educated in all the wisdom of the Egyptians, so he's had the best possible education you could probably have in the world at that time. And he is powerful in speech and action. So he is ready. By any measure, he is ready to lead. Next slide, please, Adi. When Moses was 40 years old, so this is where he's up to. So he has grown, he is ready. He decided to visit his own people, the Israelites. He knew he was an Israelite, and he went in there to visit them. He saw one of them being mistreated by an Egyptian. So he went to his defense and avenged him by killing the Egyptian. Moses thought that his own people would realize that God was using him to rescue them, but they did not. So where are we up to? Moses has grown up in the palace. By any objective measure, he's ready. He's physically grown, he's got a good education, he's good at speech and action. He is ready to lead. He then goes back to the Israelites thinking that he could be their great leader, thinking he was ready. But then what happens? His character is tested and he fails massively. He fails massively. How do we know he fails massively? We know because in that moment, when he is first tested, he fails the character test, doesn't he? He sees an injustice and he wants to step in. But rather than doing it with self-control and maturity, he does it out of emotion and instinct and humanity, and he kills the Egyptian. He fails the character test. How many times do we fail the character test in our lives? How many times... Thanks, Mary. How many times do our actions tell us something about where our character is really up to? I remember a few years ago, I was working in SA Health, and I was running the media department for SA Health with all the hospitals and the health services. Terribly difficult job at times. Things were always going wrong, and still are. And my job was to kind of keep things moving from a media public relations perspective. And there was this one particular morning, I had a lot of phone calls with journalists and media organisations and producers and those sorts of things. There was one particular time, one of the radio stations in Adelaide really did the wrong thing by SA Health. They did quite a bad thing for us. They didn't give us a chance to speak on a story that ran and it wasn't true, and all this sort of thing happened. And so I picked up the phone to ring the producer, and it was about 7:15 on a sort of a bleak Thursday morning, and I was angry. And this radio station had done the wrong thing by us. And the producer picks up the phone, I say who I am, didn't really catch her name, wasn't interested. And I gave it to her, right? I mean, I gave it to her. I told her she'd done the wrong thing. She then sought to apologise, but I wasn't done yet. And I wanted to make sure that we got our just desserts, that she knew she was in the wrong. And so I told her what I thought. And always just a little bit more, don't you? I mean, when you're coming back to someone, you always go just a little bit. Not too much that's ridiculous, but you just want to get back a little bit more. So I finished the phone call and I felt pretty good, and I walked in the office and told everyone, yeah, I sorted that out. Rah, rah. A week later, a friend of mine said, I hear you spoke to my wife on the phone the other day. And of course you have that sinking moment, don't you? And he said it was her first day. And she'd stepped into the role of producer just for the day. And it was a pretty busy morning, right? So you're all thinking I'm as bad a person as I felt at the time. But I realised in that moment that my actions revealed something about what was going on inside me. Now, what happened here with Moses? His action, killing the Egyptian, revealed something about what was going on inside him. He was not ready to lead. His character wasn't ready. He might have been intellectually there. He might have had a righteousness. He might have even had a sense of God's calling and that God had placed a dream on his life, but he was not ready to leave. Why? Because his character wasn't ready. What should be the direction of our character? When we realise this, when we have that moment like I had when I was like, my character's not ready and I need to improve my character. What is the direction? Growth, when I think about growth, we can grow weary, we can grow tired, we can grow cynical, you can grow in the wrong direction. When I was 8 or 9 years old, I was playing football and I fell over and I hurt my finger. And I said to my mum, my loving, caring mother, I've got a really sore finger, I think we should go to the doctor. And she said, harden up and get back out there. And then, and my finger grew. And it kind of grew. I don't know if anyone's ever noticed, but you probably haven't noticed. You know, I've got quite nice hands generally, but you probably never noticed that my finger grew. So you can't unsee that now. My finger grew in the wrong direction. So we don't want to grow in the wrong direction. It's an idiocy. It's terrible. Yes, that's right. So what's the right direction? What's the right direction for our character? Well, the scriptures seem to suggest that the right direction for our character is always towards love and grace. The direction we want our character to grow is toward love and grace. 2 Peter 3:17 and 18. Take care you are not carried away with the error of lawless people and lose your own stability, but grow in the grace and knowledge of our Lord Jesus Christ. As we grow our characters, it should always be toward grace. Okay, so back to the story. So Moses, clearly here, he needs his character to grow. Then what happens? Next slide, 80, thanks. The next day, Moses came upon 2 Israelites who were fighting. He tried to reconcile them by saying, men, you are brothers. Why do you want to hurt each other? But the man who was mistreating the other pushed Moses aside and said, who made you ruler and judge over us? Are you thinking of killing me as you killed the Egyptian yesterday? When Moses heard this, he fled to Midian. Moses in this moment realises that he stuffed it all up. He realises that he's made a mistake. He also realises he doesn't have proper authority, because as soon as his authority is questioned, he goes to water and he takes off to Midian, 10 days away. He goes to Midian. Next slide, 80, thanks. Long journey to Midian, and then we're flicking into Exodus 2 here. Moses fled from Pharaoh, went to live in Midian, and this is really interesting, where he sat down by a well It's always interesting, these details that are included in these stories. He sat down by a well. Now, I imagine he's been on the road for 10 days and he finds a spot to sit and he sits down on a well, sits down at the well. Now, I'm not imagining he's sitting there nice and upright. I sort of imagine Moses kind of hunched over. His life trajectory was heading in this direction. He's failed a fundamental character test that has sent him 10 miles away, out into exile essentially, out into Midian, to the middle of nowhere. And he's thinking, what has become of my life? Where am I going? What is my future? All these things have happened and I am absolutely nowhere. Have you ever found yourself in that place in life where everything you thought it was headed has all of a sudden stopped? And everything you'd built your life upon, all of a sudden you come to a place where you think, where am I? What can I possibly do? But interestingly, at this moment, this thing happens. Now, a priest of Midian had 7 daughters, and they came to draw water and fill the troughs to water their father's flock. Some shepherds came along and drove them away, but Moses got up, came to their rescue, and watered their flock. This is interesting. In Moses' worst moment, sitting by the well, head in his hands, he doesn't plan a great strategy for future growth. He doesn't work out how he's going to get himself back to Egypt to become the leader he once was. He probably has no idea what his future holds. But what does he do? He does something. He does something. He actually takes a step and does something. And he helps these women. Now, out of this, when the women get home, they say to their father, there's this really good guy down the well and he helped us out. And he ends up coming into that family. He marries one of these 7 ladies. He has children. And he then spends the next, get this, 40 years in that family of the priest of Midian, under the priest of Midian's kind of tutelage and guidance, I guess you can probably infer. And it is the start of his path back to growth, development, and his path back to leadership. He took a step. He did something. He would never have known that it could end up the way it ended up, but he did something. For many of us, when we're in that place where we feel paralysed and we don't know what our next step is, we might not have a full plan laid out. We might not know exactly where the road leads, but we can do something. We can do something good. There's a guy called Viktor Frankl who was a psychiatrist, a Jewish psychiatrist who survived the Holocaust, and he was a prisoner of war in one of the worst Nazi camps in Auschwitz and one of the other camps as well. And he, at the end of the war, when he was freed, he wrote a book called Man's Search for Meaning. It's one of the great books. And he created a whole psychoanalysis theory called logotherapy, but we can talk about that another time. And he has this great quote. And you think about those, the awful things that occurred at Auschwitz. And he said this. He said, everything can be taken from a man, but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way. Even in the moment when you feel like you've got nothing else, when you're sitting at the metaphorical well in your life and you've got your head in your hands, there is one thing you can do. You can choose your own attitude to life and you can take a step. It's exactly what Moses did here. John Maxwell says this, who's a leadership kind of guru. Although it looks like we've got a few that are emerging amongst us at the moment. Growth doesn't just happen. We don't improve by simply living. We have to be intentional about it. And the sooner you make the transition to becoming intentional about your personal growth, the better it will be for you, because growth compounds and accelerates as you remain intentional about it. If you and I want to become the kinds of people that we feel God's calling us to be, and we want to improve our character growth, it takes intentionality. Moses knew his character needed to grow. He actually did something. And then, like I just said previously, it took 40 years. It took a lot of time. It takes time. Letitia, our 7-year-old, had her first day of school a couple of years ago. And at the end of her first day of reception, I said, "How's your day, darling?" She said, "Oh, it was great." She said, "Still can't read." We want things fast, don't we? Like, we want things to happen quickly. Like, we want this message, we want to walk out of here and have character growth straight away. And we want it now. And we say to God, "God, I've been faithful since last Friday. And I've done all the right things for at least 17 hours. Why aren't you giving me the thing that I want? And Moses spends 40 years herding sheep. And God is chipping away and working away in his life, just gradually, bit by bit, in his own time, not in Moses' time. Moses was probably ready to walk straight back into Egypt, make it all happen. But God had a different time cycle, didn't he? And it's different to us. And what do we do in the face of that? Well, we know that we have some peace in the fact that over time, God seems to shape human beings. He seems to work in our lives. He seems to chip away at us. And we accept God's timing. I remember when I was a bit younger, I missed out on a football team that I really wanted to get into. And I was on my bed crying. I was about 11 years old. Tears were coming out. And my dad just slipped a note under my door. And it was a quote from someone. It said this: instead of thinking about where you are, think about where you want to be. It takes 20 years of hard work to become an overnight success. Now, to me, that's a little bit about what this journey of faith's like. It takes bit by bit over time for God to work in our lives and for us to grow to become the kinds of people that we can be. It takes time. If we go to the next slide, 80, back to the story of Moses. After 40 years had passed, an angel appeared to Moses in the flames of a burning bush in the desert near Mount Sinai. When he saw this, he was amazed at the sight. So he's 80 years old at this point. As he went over to get a closer look, he heard the Lord say, "I'm the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob." Moses trembled with fear and did not dare to look. Then the Lord said to him, "Take off your sandals, for the place where you're standing is holy ground. I've indeed seen the oppression of my people in Egypt. I've heard their groaning and have come down to set them free. Now come, I will send you back to Egypt." Moses, you are ready to go. You are ready to go. And then what does Moses say if we go to the next slide? But Moses said to God, "Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt? Who am I?" Now, I want you really quickly here, just let's compare this Moses with the previous Moses that killed the Egyptian earlier. What's the difference here? The previous Moses, he was ready. He was backing himself in. He had everything he needed to go and to sort this mess out, lead the Israelites into freedom. He could do it. It was him. He was good for it. This Moses, 40 years on, God working in his character. Who am I? There's a humility that has descended here on this Moses. One of the great signs of character growth in your life and mine is humility. And maybe for you and me, the place where we are ready to really start growing, the place we're ready to start leading, the place when the kind of symptom that we know that we're ready is that we're humble. Why? Number one, it's how we should be because we're just people. Number two, it makes us far more empathetic. As Manny talked, empathetic to the people around us when we're humble. And thirdly, and most importantly, when you're humble, you're utterly reliant on God. Yeah, utterly reliant on God. When we try and live life in our own strength, when the challenges of life, when adversities come and we try and do it in our own strength, we're never as good and we fail the test compared to when God's with us and we're reliant on him and our character is where it should be. Moses had become humble. So after this story with Moses, and God said, what did God say? Did God say, God said, "I'll be with you"? He didn't say, "No, Moses, you're good to go." He didn't say, "Moses, you've got everything you need. Now off you go." He says, "I will be with you." And that is the exact same promise that you and I have. When we step out in faith, when we're facing the real challenges and the adversity of life, we have this incredible promise, "I will be with you." And then he says to Aaron and Moses a little bit later, he says, "I will help both of you speak and will teach you what to do." The growth continues, the teaching continues, the learning continues, the life change continues. So what do we do with this story? And then the story of Moses continues and he eventually, and it's a big story, he eventually leads God's people out of Egypt. and then has further hardships, as Ben talked about earlier. How do we know when we're ready? Well, we know that we have a humility. We know that God has worked in our life over a prolonged period of time, through space and time. And we do something, we have intentionality about it. I think this is true for us as individuals, but it's also true for us as a church. As a group of people, we can want to see the church become the kind of church it can become. And we all, in our own way, have passions and interests and things that we want to pursue and we should be going harder with. And a lot of those things are really good things. The truth is that God cares more about what is the character of our church than he cares about any of the bells and whistles that sit around it. Where's the heart of our church? Is it towards other people? Does it bring people in? Does it relate to other people? Does it speak the truth, even if it's not popular? Is that what our church is about? I believe that God not only works in our lives to change us over time and to bring us to become more like Jesus, but he actually is working within our church. So this week, as you commence your 40 years, sounds ominous, doesn't it? As you start, wherever you are at, sorry. Oh dear. Have faith. Look. As you start the journey for however long, as you and I take our steps, as you and I take our intentional steps to grow as people, to become more like Jesus, I pray that we would have the vision in our mind of Moses, this incredible story of how God worked in his life. Let's pray. Well, God, we thank you for this story we've been able to look at today of Moses. We thank you for the way you worked in his life. We thank you that you were able to grow his character. We also thank you for someone much greater than Moses, your son Jesus, who is the perfect example of a character. And we thank you that his character led him to the cross for us, and that through him we can have life, and an incredible life. And I just ask right now that as we reflect on ourselves, as we ask those deeper questions about our hearts and about our character, that you would show us the truth about who we are, and that you would, by your Holy Spirit, give us meaningful actions to take every single day to grow, to become the kind of people that you have called us to be. So we just ask all this in the name of Jesus. Amen.
Well, what an awesome message that was from Cullen about Grow as he starts our new series. Thanks so much, everyone, for coming. Next week, we'll be continuing the series on Grow, and Ran will be speaking to us. So thanks, everyone.